Okay, so our guest speaker joining us today is Chia-Ming. And I guess it was during the pandemic, really, you decided to dive headfirst into your garden consulting company. And I actually met Chia-Ming on Instagram. I follow her. She has a homesteading Instagram account that has been really educational. And I thought it would be really nice for all of us to hear her work experience and how she got into this field of horticulture. And so that we can see that the path for a lot of us in this field is not linear. Most people didn't wake up and say, I want to be a horticulturalist or I want to be a garden consultant. For a lot of us, we took a lot of different paths to eventually get here. And I think that can be really inspiring for everyone, especially to see that you don't have to start in this field at 18 years old. It's never too late to start doing something that you're really passionate about. And so I'm really excited to welcome Chia-Ming. And if you wanted to just introduce yourself and say where you're from and what you're doing now. And then as we go, I'll have some other questions for you.
Yeah, sure. So, hi, I'm Chia-Ming. I live in El Segundo, so it's really close to LAX. So probably not that far from you guys. Just to kind of show you where I'm at, we're talking Southern California. And I think I'm guessing everyone's in Southern California, right? In
I,
your area?
I believe so, but some may not be since we're teaching
Okay,
online. We kind of have students from all over now.
gotcha.
Mhm.
So I do think living in an area that allows us to grow year round has been instrumental in being able to start my business. So if I go back to this time last year, we were all under COVID restrictions. We were all stuck at home and everyone started to do home improvement, right? So my plan was originally to renovate the inside, but with COVID, I didn't want germs. I didn't want people in my house. So obviously we shifted that budget to do the outside. So I got to get my garden that I wanted sooner than normal. And with that, I scrapped my entire front lawn and started doing a front yard garden, an edible garden. I built beds because I thought I'm spending $60 a month to pay someone to mow a strip of grass that is maybe 4 feet by 15 feet. That seems like a lot to spend on something that we don't even appreciate. So by removing all that, I could all of a sudden grow food. And because I was in the front yard now gardening, I met neighbors that I'd lived here for a year and I didn't even know they lived two doors down. So because of that, I realized, wait a second, this is a way to help people heal and we can still meet each other because we're outside and it was still allowed. And that's kind of when the light bulb went off and I said, well, I should make a business out of this. And yes, there is passion behind gardening and plants and things like that for me. I've been gardening ever since I was little. I started with my mother, just kind of following and watching her growing vegetables and things that, my family's from Taiwan. I came when I was 3, and there's things that we couldn't get from the grocery store that was familiar, right? So my mom would somehow get a branch or a cutting from a friend who had the plant and would stick it in the ground and grow it that way. So it was very, pun intended, grassroots, right? And because of that, gardening was always a lifestyle. There was no question of, is it a hobby or I'm going to pick it up and put it down? I was always growing something. And so when I decided to start a business, I thought, okay, what is there a gap in? And I think there are a lot of people who have started, like Holly said, started in the education side of horticulture and they've done the formal route. Whereas for me, my background is actually in finance and accounting. I spent my entire education. I have an undergrad degree in finance and accounting, and I worked in those roles my entire career. I just quit this year, actually. I had launched my business last year, so I was doing both at the same time, and I can get more into my recommendations if this is something that you're looking into doing of how to do it. And I decided I wanted to, because you mentioned age, I'll share it too. I was 39 last year. I turned 40 this year. So to me, I thought, well, I've spent 17 years in finance and accounting. I also have an MBA in entrepreneurship, but I thought, I've been working for other people for so long and it didn't feel fulfilling anymore. I wanted to be able to do more with my life, put my stamp on it. Maybe it's a midlife crisis. I don't know. But I decided I needed something, and this was that thing. So I took all my knowledge. So I don't know where everyone is in terms of their career path or what they're doing today, but everything that you've done so far can be applied to what you're going to do later. So don't think it's black and white that after you take horticulture classes, that's the only thing that you're going to need to start your business. You're going to need to channel all the things that you've learned before, even if it doesn't seem 100% relevant, because most jobs you probably learned some level of customer service, even if it's just working with your peers or a boss or something like that. And that's going to be so key to running a horticulture based business. It's not that it's not about the plants, but that is going to be only one piece of the entire puzzle. So that is a long-winded, but kind of how I got to where I am. So if you wanted to, any specifics, we could go through those too.
Yeah, and that's so great. So almost every guest speaker that we've had so far has had sort of the same advice, where most of the guest speakers have started out doing something totally different, but they've found ways to incorporate that into what they're doing now. And it's so true. When we're working with plants, often the plants are the easy part, and it's the people that we have to work with that can be the difficult part, or
Yes.
even just learning how to keep your finances in order or market for your business. Those are often the harder things to learn, especially if you're really passionate about plants. That part's going to come probably easier to you.
Yes.
So really any path that you're coming from, there's something valuable that you learned there. So if you spent 10 years of your life studying business, all is not lost. That's going to become really important to you. Definitely. So thank you for sharing that. So do you want to share about what you're doing now, what the name of your company, what a day in the life is like?
Sure. So the name of my company is Coastal Homestead, and it came about actually just as a whim a year ago. Before I started my business, I actually had the handle on Instagram. So it's coastal_homestead, because I live in a coastal environment. I'm a mile from the beach, and I was trying to turn my own home into an urban homestead. So like in a week, I'm going to have bees. And then in 2 weeks, no, sorry, like 3-4 weeks, I'm going to have chickens. So this was originally a passion project for my personal life that I turned into a business in a very short amount of time. So basically, I set up turnkey gardens. And the one thing that I would definitely focus on, or I want to be able to share with people where you are today thinking about it, it's installing gardens is a lot of work and there's a lot of reward. However, there may not be enough margin for you to do it full time until a lot longer. Now, I started my business like day one, July 2020. I quit my full-time job by mid-March of 2021. So that is a very, very short time. And I think it's important to also share that I'm a mom of two. I have a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old. So it's possible. You don't have to start out and be first career to get into this. This is my second. And so in saying that, installing gardens, that is, I think if we're in this room, then we love that, right? We love getting somebody else's garden set up and it's beautiful, it's fresh, it's amazing. However, there's going to be an element of maintenance, right? Is your client going to want to maintain, or are they going to pay you to maintain? And you have to be really honest with yourself. Do you even like doing maintenance? If you don't, then what is the plan, right? Because most likely these people who come to you don't know all that much about gardening or anything about plants, and they're not going to know how to maintain it. So either you teach them, you give them somebody else who can maintain it, or you do it. So those are kind of the next step beyond just the setup of the garden. So because I wanted to get out of my day job, I knew that this is something that I was passionate about, is teaching people how to grow food. I specialize in edible gardening, not necessarily like landscaping. That's kind of the differentiating line for me, is I don't want to do a succulent garden. That's not my thing. I don't love it. If that's your thing, that's fantastic. Go for it. Just not mine. So I focus on teaching food and how to harvest, how to plant, propagate, things like that. So the other side of it and how I've been able to grow my business is surprisingly through Instagram. And that's how I met your professor. And yeah, it's been amazing to see that I have had celebrity clients reach out to me because they somehow found me. So I don't know if you know who she is, but Lauren Conrad is one of my clients, and she found me through Instagram. I found out she was following me. I sent her a DM and she responded. I was shocked that she responded. And that would also be another thing I would encourage you to do, is start your networking now. Tell all your friends, all your family, tell them what you're doing, because you can start small and it feels safer, right? And you can make your mistakes. You can learn what you like and what you don't like. Like, I don't like doing maintenance, so I need to find a solution for that. And those are kind of the things that I would share at this juncture that you're at. It's, you don't have to wait till you're done with all your coursework. Start exploring right now. So then when you do have everything, when opportunities arise, you're already poised and ready to like fire off everything, because you've already tested it. You already know what you like and you don't like.
Yeah, there would be nothing worse than committing to like a landscape maintenance business and then realizing that you don't actually like maintaining landscapes, right? So
Yeah.
that's
I
why.
have a friend who did that.
Oh,
She actually reached out to me and was like, hey, I am at a point where I have so many maintenance clients. She doesn't love doing maintenance, but she had so many clients she could quit her day job, but she doesn't love doing it. So
yeah.
it's like at that point, you're like, oh, I did all the work. So what do you do? So she's actually hiring someone to help her do that part. But then you have to do HR, you have to pay them, you have to make sure everything works out. And then all of a sudden it's not within your control. So this is the time to ask yourself and try everything.
Yeah, take as many classes as you can, volunteer. I know,
Yes.
it's hard when you're very busy to take time to volunteer. I get that. If you're working full time and maybe you have children, or maybe you have two jobs and you're in school, finding time to volunteer can seem
Very hard.
daunting, but it really is a great way to do something just for one day or a few days and have an idea of if you like it or not.
Yeah. So in order to build my business in the short amount of time and work a full-time, I was a finance director, full-time job. I basically told myself, okay, it's mid-year 2020. By the time I turned 40 in 2021, it was just like big milestone for me personally, that I said, okay, I'm going to throw the dart. That's my end goal. If I can't launch something where I can see that the gap between my day job salary and what I'm building, if there isn't like a small enough gap that I can make that leap of faith, then this probably isn't worth it or isn't going to work. So I knew what I was signing myself up for. Basically, my kids would go to bed at 7 or 8 o'clock, and then I would sit down just right like this at my computer, start and like do all the business things. And in part, it's content creation, because that's kind of my marketing tool, showing people what I do, what I know. And I think it's great that you're taking this course with your professor, because you're going to have sign off of you have a horticultural background. I don't have that. And so sometimes I will experience something like imposter syndrome, like maybe I don't know the official way to prune or to whatever, but this is what works for me. So I have to play that angle of I'm self-taught and you have this bolstering education, which I don't have. And I've definitely thought about going back and doing it, but it's when, right? If I already have a business that's keeping me full-time busy, when am I going to fill that? So I mean, I've taken a couple things like I don't know if you're familiar with Floret, the big flower place. So it's Floret Flower. And I can't pronounce her last name, but basically she's really well known for her dahlias and her cut flowers, and she's on Magnolia Network now. So her handle, I think, is Floret, Floret flower. So I do have her course because my first love in all gardening is flowers. So I wanted to at least have that. But I don't think her background was a formal horticulture experience either. It's just 10 years of flower farming. And so that's what her course is about.
Well, and I think a lot of people get started in horticulture by having an informal background anyway. Almost every guest speaker has also said that they were strongly influenced by their mother, which has been an interesting uniting factor in this panel, is that everyone's mother in some way influenced them to start gardening, which is really great. But what, and there is, going back to what you said about knowing the correct way to prune, and it's like, in the end, there are 1 million ways to do every single thing. And I tell my students out all the time, you could ask every professor in our horticulture program how to do something, and we would all probably tell you a different way, and we would all have a reason for doing it that way, and we're all right. So, obviously I'm a professor in the program, so of course I think the classes are important, but I don't think that they're the only way to break into this field. I think they're just one avenue, and it's not always the best avenue for everyone. I tend to be someone who has to be in a class to make myself dedicate time to learning. Other people are really good at pursuing those types of things outside of a classroom. So kind of depends on what's best for you. That being said, do you have any, I'm going to admit this person from the waiting room, sorry. Do you have any resources that you find yourself returning to when you do want to learn a new skill, or maybe want to learn the name of a plant or something? What are some of your favorite ways to learn?
So it seems so basic, but sometimes it's starting with Google and seeing what is out there, but also knowing that it is the internet. There is a lot of false information, but there also is good information, just taking the time to sift through it. There's also obviously books, and there's industry experts. So that's kind of where I try to turn. And I'm looking behind, like past the computer. I have like certain books that I like. But usually because I don't have the formal background, I tend to go with talking to people and asking what their experience was, like experienced gardeners, because I kind of see it like cooking, right? I'm really bad at following a specific recipe, like exact measurements. That's not who I am. But I look at about 3 to 5 recipes. I'm going to try something new, and I kind of wing it. And that's kind of how I approach how I'm going to learn how to grow something new. I might look at Instagram. I might Google some, whatever hits come up on how to grow. For example, I know loofah is a popular one, right? And I look at, this person and that person who has had success in what environment, because you probably know this too already: container gardening versus in-ground versus in a raised bed or hydroponic, like all these different ways. So I try to take from people who are doing it well and it shows. Then I kind of try to take that information and distill it into what would work for me based on how I'm growing. And frankly, I have clients ask me, how do I do this? And I said, well, sometimes you won't know unless you try.
Mhm.
So that's my best advice for that.
And that's great advice, because it's so true. And exactly like you said, you sort of, as you start learning more about growing things, you learn to disseminate good information from bad information, or maybe I shouldn't say bad information, maybe misinformed information. But
Yeah.
because I do the same thing when I want to learn about a new plant, I read I read in a couple of different books, or I go to a couple of different websites and I start finding the things that they say that are in common. And I kind of go with that. But again, we have microclimates and we have different ways of growing things that's what's really cool about this field, is that there isn't an exact way to do something. And that makes it really fun. And one day you can grow an eggplant and it'll grow beautifully, and you can do the exact same thing next year and it might die. So
Yep.
that's another thing I always tell our students, is that sometimes you did everything right and the plant just like did not want to be alive. So it happens even to the most experienced people in this
Mhm.
field.
Yeah, so I always plant extra. So
Yeah.
if it does not work out, okay, I still have the food and everything. Because like if you look at the weather this year, I don't know about where you are, but for me, it feels colder than it normally would at this point in the year. And I've been waiting to put my tomatoes in. I've been waiting for all this, and it still feels too cold. So we'll just see how it goes.
So what is your favorite part of your job?
I think it's actually meeting my clients and the reward of when something actually clicks and they actually go from planting all the way to harvest and they get to eat it. That feeling, you can't replicate that. You can't manufacture that. And the only way to do it is to put in the work and to try it. And so when you see it's like a twinkle in their eye and their like eyes just get really big. And I think we all probably experience that when we grow something new and we like get to finally harvest and eat. That's the feeling. Um, that's what keeps me going, because I'll be honest, because I want you to be set up for success. Setting up, there's going to be so much out of your control when you start your own business. And for example, I tend to build raised beds with redwood, and we all know that wood prices have skyrocketed, right? So that means, do I eat that cost and keep my prices the same, or do I increase my prices? So these are things that you don't necessarily think about when you're first starting out, and there's going to be all these business factors. So it kind of balances out when you have a client and that light bulb goes off and they're like, yes, and they become super passionate about gardening too.
Awesome. Thank you. So I was going to ask you the next, what is the biggest challenge? But maybe you just answered that.
Yeah, so it's going to be factors that you may not necessarily have like thought out before. One other thing to think about is regulations and laws and legal things, because, I'm pretty sure in the state of California, you're not allowed to dig unless you have a contractor's license. So then it's like, are you going to go spend another 3 to 4 years working for someone else to get that sign off so you can actually dig and do irrigation? And if you don't do irrigation, who's going to do it for you? And how do you set up someone for success without irrigation? And I don't have a contractor's license. And so I actually hand water all of my garden, and that's how I teach. So you have to figure out what you want to do and know all the regulations, because the last thing you want to do is, a lot of my clients have $2 million plus properties, is that if I were to touch irrigation and something happens, it's all on me, right? And even if someone else came and I hired them, first off, you're not allowed to hire, you can't subcontract that out. But let's say it was my recommendation, my person, then people are so happy, it could fall onto you. And then what? That's a lot of stress, right? So I'm giving you all, even like the scary stuff, because these are things that you need to know before you start. So
No, I think it's great that you're speaking on the things that maybe are even a little intimidating, because what happens is a lot that I see are people will take their first horticulture class and they'll be really excited and they'll want to start their own floral business or start their own plant nursery. I know what it's like to have that excitement and think I'm just going to go for it and not consider all of the things that maybe could go wrong. And it's just better to be prepared, even for the things that are really scary, that we don't want to think about. Because when you are excited about something, those are not the things at the forefront of your mind. But so it's nice to have that reminder. What would you say, and I know that you kind of just started Coastal Homestead, but what would you say is your biggest accomplishment so far?
I guess I'm learning a lot about myself, and you wouldn't probably think that this is like necessarily an accomplishment when you first start out. And it's, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you're going to have to learn to get out of your own way. And if you have imposter syndrome, or if you think negatively, you're not going to get ahead of that. So for me, my biggest accomplishment would probably be, I alluded to it before, where part of my business is all about installing and designing edible gardens. But the other part is the creator side. And because I realized that being a, if you will, an influencer content creator, it allows me to have another revenue stream that it was within my control, and I don't have to hire someone. Because if I only wanted to do physical gardens, that's a lot of work to get there, to get to the numbers I needed to make it a full-time job. But with content creation, I have brands finding me and paying me for that. So I think it's being able to pivot. And so that's probably my biggest. I started thinking I was only going to do the physical gardens, and now I'm doing this secondary arm. So I think that would probably be my biggest achievement.
I mean, that's a really good one, to be able to just take on different roles as they come up.
Yeah.
That's another piece of advice that I would always offer to students is, if someone offers you something that you think maybe sounds interesting, just do it. Try it once. If you hate it, you never have to do it again, but you could end up really liking it.
Yeah, I honestly, because of like my age, I'm 40, right? And I always thought, oh, influencer or whatever, that's totally not me. I'm not one of those, what a sellout, that type of thing. So my whole perspective of that has completely changed, and it's a lot harder than it looks. The one that I just did was actually a multi 5-figure deal for a property company. So we're talking tens of thousands of dollars. And because I'm doing that, I'm not feeling so stressed out about how am I going to make my May revenue and how many gardens to set up. And I won't go too deep into it, but if you're really thinking about doing this full time, something to think about is, okay, let's say I set up a garden and it's $5,000 for the whole garden, right? How much of it is in materials? Let's say it's $2,500 in materials. Then I'm left with $2,500, right? Do I need to hire someone to help me lift things or deliver things? All of a sudden, your 5,000 whittles down very quickly. And then maybe you're left with 500, or maybe it's 1,000, but that's your time and your effort. And how many hours did you put in to designing, planning, and all of that? So you take your 1,000 that's left, you divide it by, let's say 20 hours. How many dollars per hour was that? Was it worth your time? So these are the things that I think you won't learn in a horticulture class, but if you want to start your own business, it's very crucial to set up for success in thinking this way. Now, I just went really fast in numbers because that's my background, and that's my illustration of how I was able to plan my path to doing my own business. Is I said, okay, if I want to make $10,000 a month, how many gardens is that? If it's 5,000 each, right? It's like I needed 2 gardens. So when you start thinking of it like that, then you can backtrack it and then go like, okay, well, how many people do I need to talk to even to get those 2 gardens? So it's that type of thinking.
Yeah, a lot of planning involved to make it
Mm-hmm.
happen. Hmm. That's awesome. Um, so have you taken like any cool workshops that you would recommend? I know you said you mentioned the Floret
Mm-hmm.
Instagram that you follow, but any fun workshops or
Yeah.
other resources that you'd like to share?
So I, because I don't, and I keep talking and I bring this up because this is an area that I'm looking at myself, taking an honest assessment of where am I lacking? And like, let's say on paper, where am I lacking, right? In a resume as a edible garden consultant. And that would be my formal education in horticulture. So I needed to figure out a way to fill that void if I wasn't going to go to an extension course or I wasn't going to fill that with actual formal education. And so I decided for me, I was going to build my social credibility and tell the story of maybe I don't have the formal education, but I have the experience and I'm able to do that through social content. And maybe like when the question is posed, you think it's a horticulture class, right? And I'm telling you, no, I took some like social growth, I guess, or platform or Instagram courses. And they weren't very expensive courses. It might be like $100 or $200, where it was like, okay, this is how to make a reel, or this is how to do, I don't know, increase your engagement. And some of this stuff is actually free too. There's so much information out there. I think it's, to go back to the exact question, look at what your whole package of who you are is, and then take the course to help you fill that gap.
That's a great answer. That makes a lot of sense. Again, because as we said before, having floral design business or landscaping or growing crops, even propagating plants, you're doing so much more than that part of it. And you are doing the marketing and the customer service and the back end of HR and planning. And so that's great. Yeah, it doesn't have to be necessarily just a horticulture class or workshop that comes in the most handy for you. Um, so what are your favorite things to plant, like for your clients and also for yourself?
So for my clients, I always start with the question, what do you like to eat? Because if you don't like tomatoes, there's no point in us growing tomatoes. End of story. So usually I start there. So it's very custom. And I almost always start them with seedlings because a lot of my clients are inexperienced. And since you're in this class, I'm guessing you have some experience. And you know that when you go from seed all the way to fruit is a long path. And there's so much more care in the beginning part to seedling. So if I start them off at seedling, they're more guaranteed for success. So in terms of actual plant, I don't have one for my clients. For myself, my favorite things in my garden are the things that I can't necessarily buy in a store. So it's going to be my passion fruit. I have a wax apple tree in the back. It's a Taiwanese fruit that I love. And what else? And I love trying new things. So this year, I think I'm trying 12 different new tomatoes I've never grown before. I'm not growing the same thing again because I'm not that married to something where I'm like, I have to have this variety again and again every year. So yeah, I like to try new things.
Nice. Are you like an avid note taker? Do you write, it took this long? No, I'm the same.
I'm awful about
Yeah.
that, to be honest. And that's probably why I don't want to do maintenance because if you don't remember exactly what you put in and when you did it, it's kind of hard to backtrack. And I also feel like even if you took notes, the result is sometimes different. It's an experiment every single time. I wish I was better. but I'm not.
No, I had the same thought when you said that you weren't good at following a recipe. You kind of just like to go for it, because I'm very much the same way. And when I teach a class, the way that I teach people to do things is often different than the way I do them myself. So I teach my students to be diligent note takers, come up with a really solid plan, because it's good if you start that way when you're
Yes.
learning something. But in my own garden, I'm like, we'll see what happens, and usually it works out in some way. Even if the working out is not quite a success, I don't say it's a failure, because in the end I learned something.
Exactly.
So I'm the same. I plant different things every year, and we had this conversation. We both start our seeds late, and
Yeah.
it works out. It's not as exact as everyone thinks.
No. And it's like what, mid-May right now.
Yeah.
And full confession, I haven't started seeds because I look at this weather and I'm like, I don't feel like doing it. So I kind of procrastinate. It may or may not bite me later, but it's too cold and I
Yeah.
don't want to do it. So yeah.
No, it's refreshing to hear that, though, because I think especially when we talk about like social media or even reading some of these textbooks and things, it's like everyone's starting their seeds on this date every year, and we feel like we're behind or that we're missing out when we're not so exact. And I get this feedback in assignments a lot. We just did a seed germination test in one of my courses, and um, some of the seeds didn't germinate, and some of the students were panicked that they were going to get a bad grade. And it's like, well, the point is not that they all germinate. The point is learning why they didn't germinate,
Yeah.
So as long as you're learning something, you're succeeding.
Yeah, I agree completely. And then with the note taking, I feel like every time, I think we, as experienced gardeners, we kind of let go of it because we know that the end result, we know what to do.
Mhm.
If it goes sideways, we kind of know we have like three things we could do to like get it back on track. So we're like, I got this, just like cooking.
Yeah, it becomes second nature or intuitive the more that you
Yeah.
do it.
That's why I try to tell my clients is I may not have your formal horticulture background, but I try to teach it intuitively and I try to make it as layman's terms as possible. Like
Mhm.
if I need a jacket to go outside, my plants probably are going to get cold too, and certain things don't go in the ground. I try to make it like a profile, tomatoes, peppers, they like it hot. They're probably going to be like your Florida person, right? Who likes it very hot. Well, where I live right now, it's gloomy and it's 65. They're not going to like it by me. So I have trouble growing certain varieties of tomatoes and peppers because I'm putting it in an environment it doesn't like. So how do I change that to make it acceptable and for them to flourish?
Yeah. Also, I just wanted to mention that imposter syndrome it runs rampant. So, and that's a big part of social media too. Even as a horticulture professor, I still feel sometimes like, do I know what I'm doing? Do I know enough? And that's really just constantly having someone to compare ourselves to, so formal education or not, it still exists within everyone. So,
And I
uh,
think that's really interesting for you to bring up because I had a client who's very new to gardening, but for us in the room, our new to gardening is a different line and everybody else has a different starting line. And this client last night sent me a photo and she didn't ask me at the beginning of purchasing this blueberry bush, but she sent me a photo like a month later. I didn't know she bought it. Sent me a photo and all I saw left were sticks. And right now, if you know, blueberries should be leaves, blueberries on there. And she told me, I'm not sure if I did this wrong. And I think everyone in the room would be like, you probably did.
yeah.
And it wasn't until, this was over text. So it probably wasn't until about 7 exchanges back and forth. She finally told me she didn't water it for 10 days. Okay. So like I said, everybody's starting line is very different.
Mhm.
And if you're taking a horticulture class, your starting line is going to be way ahead of somebody like that. So it's like, to us, it's a no-brainer, but then I think it helps to validate our imposter syndrome of, do we know enough? Because you're so deep in it that you don't realize that you could still teach somebody else, which I think is the beauty of doing what we do.
Yeah, definitely. I think those moments come to me too, like if I'm out hiking with my friends and they'll see a plant and they'll say, does this flower? And I'm like, oh, well, almost everything flowers except for,
Yes.
or they'll see a cactus and they're like, cactus have flowers? Like, yeah, everything flowers except for gymnosperms, ferns, and mosses. And they're like, what?
Yep.
Okay, I
Just
didn't know.
today,
Yeah.
like on a consultation, they were like, well, I haven't decided if I'm going to plant cacti or succulents.
Yeah.
And I'm like, they're
Yeah.
kind of the same, but they're kind of not. They're kind of the same, but okay, fine.
Yeah.
So there's the words, the everything, like there's just a very big, vast
Right.
differentiation.
Yeah, that's true. Well, the last question I have for you, and then we'll open it up to our students here is, and you kind of touched on this too, but what would be your best piece of advice to someone who wanted to do what you're doing, to start their own business in horticulture?
Do not wait till you have everything together to start, because you're not ever going to have everything together. When you have your own business, and even sometimes if you decide to work for someone else, there's going to be challenges that you have no control over, and you're going to have to dive in and push through. So if you wait for, because I have that issue personally where I like to have all my pieces before I start gardening, right? I want to have all my plants. I want to have the whole picture because I want to know exactly where everything is going to go. And this is part of my self-discovery of doing business is that's actually a form of perfectionism. And I never thought of myself as a perfectionist. But when it comes to wanting, it's like control, right? We want everything all set, then we'll dive in. But by doing that, you will miss all these opportunities that go by. So start small, start now, and test it, because you may discover you love it. You may discover you hate it and you don't want your own business, but you want to work for someone else, because by doing that, you don't have to do all the pieces. So that would be my biggest takeaway advice.
Yeah, you can't wait until you know everything, because
you'll never know everything.
Yeah, you're always learning. I'm still learning. I still am regularly taking classes or, learning from friends, from our guest speakers. So you'll be a constant student, and that always makes you better at whatever you're doing as well.
Yes.
Does anybody have any questions? You can either unmute yourself or go ahead and type it in the chat. It's up to you. Sophia?
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead, Rosalinda.
I want to ask you, do you have to have a business insurance for what you're doing?
It depends on your level of risk appetite. So right now I am looking to get that myself, because it is a cost to do that. And I know starting out, you may be limited in budget. So for example, if someone already has some planter beds and you're just filling it and everything's already set up, how risky is that? It's going to be on the individual, right? Mm-hmm. But then let's say there's a garden, there's a client, they want you to bring and set up everything. What happens if it goes wrong? What if you were to get sued? In that case, you probably want insurance. So you want to ask yourself, and that's why I say don't wait for everything to be in order to start, because you're going to learn this as you go. In an ideal world, yes, have your insurance so you're covered. But I understand in reality, it doesn't always happen that way.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Sophia?
Were you ever discouraged about the competition out there in regards to starting a business? Is there room out there for friendly competition?
That's such a good question.
It is a fantastic question. And I think I love that you asked this, because there is always room. And that's because it doesn't always feel that way, but there is always room, because there's always somebody new, like my person who didn't water for 10 days. How many people do you know that are like that, who can benefit, right? And is there room for friendly competition? Yes, but you have to start your networking now. Find the people that you trust that share at the same level that you share, because there's plenty of people out there who are ready to copy, who will ask you all the questions, but when it comes to you needing to lean on them, they have no answers. So, I mean, it sounds very serious, but I've experienced it myself, where I think I'm sharing quite a bit with you in the class because that's who I am. And so finding the right people, I just had this conversation with a friend, finding someone who's at the same intensity as you, because maybe they're not going to launch their business as quickly, but maybe you want to do it in the next 3 months. So that's going to be 2 different people, right? And I've had people on Instagram, because that's where I'm growing my following, right? I've had people copy me. I'll post a certain subject, and then the next day or the same day, it'll be the same thing. And in the same fashion too, style, font, like everything. And I'm human, so I'll look at that and I'll get mad. But then I realize that is a very short-term view, right? I could be mad right now, but I'm going to keep creating and I'm going to keep being true to myself. And if I can focus on that, this person will never beat me, will never catch up to me, because they're not original. So this is what I was alluding to when I was saying you have to grow yourself in order to succeed, because it's a lot of discipline to be able to ignore that and still grow. Yeah, there's so much to be said about that question. So yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Anyone else have any questions? No?
Yeah.
I do. I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
I have a question. So you mentioned starting small, starting your business small, and to go for it. My question is, have you ever? Well, what is your advice on like farmers markets? I'm kicking around the idea, but also I'm a starter. I'm not a professional in this, but I'm kicking around that idea. What is your advice? What do you think about farmers markets?
So it depends on what you're trying to sell. Are you trying to sell plants? Are you trying to sell a service? Because if you're trying to sell plants, there could be regulations around that. And I think there are licenses that are required. So unless you have those, you may want to be careful with something as public as a farmer's market. They may not even let you in if you don't have these, depending on how formal or how, established the farmers markets are. Some will check, some won't. But starting small, I honestly would say start with a budget. And I know it's because my background is in numbers and finance, but yes, your business is in horticulture. However, it's not a business unless you actually have a profit at some point. So the second you go to a farmer's market, that's what, $200 at minimum for a stand. So how many plants do you have to sell to get to that $200? Was it worth your time, right? So that's kind of my advice for when you start small, is see what you can do for free. And let's play out that farmer's market idea, for example. Let's say you want to sell a bunch of tomato seedlings. It doesn't cost a lot for you to start, a packet of seeds, whatever, right? How many of those do you have to sell to turn your profit? And what if you don't even sell them? What if you sold 2? Then you're out $200. So starting small could even be talking to friends, family, letting them know that you're doing what you're doing, and consulting if you feel confident enough. Doesn't cost you anything but your time. So those are certain things to think about.
Thank you. So it would be starting even smaller than a farmer's market.
It doesn't have to be. I just think that whatever you decide, if you want to do a farmer's market, make sure you have the budget, right? Because what if you had only $500 to start your business? What would you do with that 500? Like stretch that as much as you can. If you only had $20, what would that be? There's, Facebook Marketplace. If it's safe, if it feels safe enough, obviously the internet can be a very scary place. Or, your local area, because that's free, selling it like a pop-up shop. If you have a friend who has a storefront, or, collaborate with them, like get creative. Don't think of the regular methods, because one, other people are already doing it. And two, it's probably going to cost you money to even show up. And that's money, that's expenses that will take away from whatever money you bring in.
Anybody else have a question?
I think Rosalinda had raised her hand. I don't know. Do you still have it?
Question?
I was going to ask you if you have another type of marketing besides Instagram.
Nope. I have not paid a single dollar on getting my business out there. It's basically, and what I mean by starting small and talking about your business, you are your business until you hire people, right? So I have a dog, I go to the dog park, and these are the same people I see all the time. Hey, how's it going? How are you doing? Right? And I said, oh, I'm starting a business. I'm doing this. And that's marketing. So you have to think not traditional ads, not paying necessarily for ads, but being your biggest advocate. Because remember this, if you can't sell yourself, nobody else can, right? Because only you know what's up in here and what you want to do. So there's a lot of self-discovery and being comfortable talking about what you're going to do. And I'll leave you with another thought. And when I first started my business name was actually Organic Root, the number 2, and fruit, because I was like, oh, that's so cute. I'm going from root to fruit. And I had the number 2. Yes, on paper, cute. I had the logo, I had the website, I had everything set up to go. And I was already doing small business, right? However, the more I talked about it, I had to explain it the exact way I explained it to you, because how else are they going to find me on Instagram? How are they going to find my website? I had to say organic, the number 2, root, the number 2 to fruit, because otherwise they might spell it TO and then they can't find me. So when you're thinking about your business name and how you're going to get everything through, try to remove as many barriers as you can from your client to you, whoever that person can be. So make sure everything lines up, or you're going to have to think, oh, on Instagram, there's an underscore, or on Facebook, there's a dot, or something like that. Like try to be as consistent, because if you're starting out now, those are things that you wouldn't think about that may trip you up later.
And do you have your business card?
No, I don't have a business card. Why? Because I just didn't take the time to print it, to be honest. And, I don't need it, because right now, if you want to do it that way, so here's the thing. My clients are between the ages of 35 and 50, and most of them are already on the internet. So that's where I've spent my time. I don't have anyone else helping me on my business. I've done it all by myself. And I'm saying that not to brag, but to tell you that you can do this too. You have to get to know your customer. If your customer is not on the internet, ignore everything I just said, right? That's my customer. If your customer is going to be very traditional and wants a business card, get the business card. So I think once you figure out who your customer is, who's going to be attracted to you, then you'll be able to narrow that down.
Okay, thank you.
That's great advice. Okay, well, if anyone thinks of questions after this meeting, you can email them to me. Oh, did someone raise their hand?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, Madeline, go ahead.
Well, I think she has to
You're
unmute.
muted. Can you unmute yourself?
Okay.
There you go.
Unmute now. Your idea about your business. So I'd like to find out about the ratio of your profit with your expenses.
That is going to be your own
Do
decision.
you understand?
Yep. Yep. So I know this because I've worked in a lot of different businesses as a finance person. So I've worked at Coffee Bean, I've worked at Paramount. These are big names, right? And they all had a product. So for example, if this pen, we're just going to pretend, if this pen cost me $1 to make, how much do I want to charge that person to purchase? And when you do that, you have to think about, okay, cost me $1 to make. How much did it cost me to market? Because that's not part of the making it. That's just manufacturing, right? So then you think about how much do I want to take away? But on top of that, I would encourage you to add a little bit more because you may want to do a discount, right? You might want to say, okay, this is worth $5 at retail, but you might want to say, well, I really like you, so I'm going to charge you $4. I've given you a discount. Do you see what I'm saying? You gave them something and it made it seem really great. If you said that you were only going to charge $2 and you want to give a discount, you've made $0. So it really depends on how much you want to upcharge and how much margin you want to give yourself.
Chia-Ming, building onto that,
Mhm.
before you decided to start charging your clients, how did you decide what is a fair price for your services? Did you look at what other people are charging to kind of compare?
Yeah, so I looked at what other people were charging, and my main setup right now are raised beds made out of redwood. Nothing super special, but you can find something manufactured already by different companies. And so, okay, if it's at minimum $200 for unfinished wood, so it's really rough on the outside, but I'm using premium wood. And then you compare like a super high end is $1,000, right? But they've been in business for 10 years. So they have way more experience. They have a whole team. So maybe I'm somewhere in between. So I love that question because you can look at different people at what they're doing, but also don't let that hold you back if you think your time is more valuable or your product or something is more valuable. I would almost say start higher than you come up with, because I think as women, especially, we tend to shortchange how much our time is worth or what we're doing because we tend not to inflate that. Whereas men, it's just the way culture has been or society shows up, right? We are more likely to be like, "Ooh, I don't know if my time is worth enough," or we'll already bring that value down. Whereas men, they're like, "That's my price," and they don't even think twice sometimes. So maybe I'm not supposed to say that, but that's just my experience. So what I've noticed is by starting up higher, I can always bring that price down. When you start lower, you can rarely bring that price up. And you know that in your own consumer behavior. When you go to a store and all of a sudden they've raised the prices, how do you feel? Not good. But if you knew it was more and you saw it go down, you're like, steal, purchased, right? So there's a lot of looking into what you already know and what you already experience as yourself as a customer and using that. Oh, one last thought I'll leave you with for that question is you may not be your own customer. And if you're in this class, you already know how to grow plants, right? Or you're learning it right now. The person who's going to hire you does not know that. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And so you would never pay what you're worth because you already know the answer, right? So don't think of it the amount that you would be willing to pay, because that's never going to be the same amount. I would never pay someone like myself to set up a garden because I'm a DIY person to a fault, and I will go figure it out and do it myself. So if I only charge what I would be willing to pay, I'd never make money. And if you're not making money, you're not in business. It's just a hobby. So
I feel like we just got a little business
Thank you.
101 here. That was such great advice for everyone, even for myself. That was wonderful.
yeah.
Okay, well, we're going to wrap it up so we can keep it to an hour. If you have questions after this that you didn't get to ask, feel free to email them to me, and then I can follow up with Chia-Ming. But otherwise, I wanted to thank you so much for being here. I think we all learned a lot, myself included. And I really appreciate it because I know you're very busy and you took some time out to speak to us. So that was very nice.
I honestly, like, this is also why I like doing what I do, because I'm my own boss and I can take the time and to encourage other people to do the same. So
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Everyone have a lovely day.
You too. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.